Hi economists, in this short video I'm going to revisit some concepts, and we have the opportunity to do this because recently in the media we've seen a lot of coverage around the emergence of a black market or illicit tobacco market in South Australia. So we're going to link it to that real world example, and the theories I'm going to look at are the diagrams, negative consumption externalities, taxes being a government intervention, and considering some intended and unintended outcomes or consequences, which we know economists are very interested in. So I've put some revision definitions here. If you want to link to IB concepts, you could look at scarcity, choice, equity, economic well-being. Remember, price inelastic demand is when demand doesn't change much in response to a change in price. And in our case, this is obviously cigarettes, they're addictive. Indirect specific excise tax, so that's a fixed amount of tax per cigarette sold. Externalities are positive or negative outcomes for those outside of the transaction. We know that cigarettes create negative consumption externalities, and also there's a welfare loss because of the overproduction and overconsumption of cigarettes. So that's market failure. Okay. So why is the negative consumption externality of cigarettes or tobacco relevant? Well, here are some snippets of recent news coverage from the last month, where we're seeing our state government in South Australia having to crack down on illicit tobacco, so the black market for tobacco. So it's very much in the real world at the moment. To revisit briefly the negative consumption externality of tobacco. So we're over consuming cigarettes and tobacco. Consumers who smoke create impacts on our health system and on passive smokers who might also get sick. So we have an external cost or a welfare loss because we are demanding far more than what would be socially optimum. So if we leave the market to itself, we would be trading at QM, where if we consider the external cost of cigarettes, we would trade at QOpt. And then often a solution, and same as Australia, we implement a tax. So an excise tax, for example, in Australia, it's about at $1.40 per cigarette. And the tax is meant to get consumption back closer to the optimum. So if we left the market to itself, we'd be at QM. We want to be at QOpt if we consider the welfare loss to society from the overconsumption. And the tax should reduce consumption in theory. So here we are moving to Q tax, obviously paying a higher price because of the tax. So in theory, and there's some evidence to suggest this has worked in Australia. If you look at some of the statistics, that we have reduced the consumption of cigarettes and we have reduced the size of the welfare loss and the impacts of the negative consumption externality. But I would ask, in reality, have we? So what we're seeing in the news is economists saying that the tax is actually way too high. We are fueling a black market. So there's some warnings here from economists which are translated to reality. And if you were to evaluate whether the excise tax actually has really work to reduce consumption, you would need to look at things like the black market that has arisen, and we've got evidence of that. And also, what about things like e-cigarettes and vaping? Because a lot of consumers are shifting out of the traditional or the cigarette tobacco market into e-cigarettes and vaping. So, and then we want to know, okay, so the government has come back in after the tax, creating a black market, come back in with more measures to reduce the size of the black market. So are these measures actually going to work? That's the economist's question, and we want to evaluate that. So you can see here we are really interested in intended outcomes, which is to reduce the consumption of cigarettes, but there's been a whole lot of unintended outcomes, such as the black market and shifts into other markets. Now, I've put here as a finisher some example exam questions. You're often questions on indirect taxes and alternate policies. This one's relating to petrol, but it could be about cigarettes. Cigarettes are obviously a demerit good because they're bad for everyone. And, what circumstances the government might impose indirect taxes, and using your diagrams. So lots to work with here, and fascinating real life example to link it to right now in 2025. Thank you.